After my daughter had just given birth 1 month ago, her body was still fragile and recovering, when my son-in-law could no longer restrain himself and revealed his true nature. He came to me, arrogant, pointing at my $120 million yacht, and spoke as if commanding me. "Mother, you must lend me the yacht tonight. I need to host a business party. The elite have already accepted the invitation. If you refuse, our whole family will be shamed." I did not react immediately, but I saw through the dirty schemes hidden in that party he planned to hold, because I could already smell the cheap perfume clinging all over him, though he always pretended to be virtuous. My hands tightened around the stem of my glass, and I steadied my breath. His eyes darted around the room, restless and demanding, as though everything I had worked for all my life was merely his to borrow and flaunt. My daughter lay upstairs with our newborn in her arms, too exhausted to even rise from bed. I thought of her pale face and the faint way she had whispered to me earlier, asking me to stay close. That memory rooted me in silence. He tapped his foot impatiently and leaned closer, his voice pressing against my ears. "Do not make me repeat myself, Mother." He called me Mother, as if the word alone could disguise the contempt that always dripped behind his smile. Inside my chest, anger flared, but I kept my face calm. I recalled the quiet nights when my husband and I had built our fortune brick by brick, and how carefully he had chosen every vessel, every property, with a vision of family unity. To see this man treated as currency for his vanity filled me with a cold determination. I glanced toward the window, where the last rays of sun fell over the sea, glinting against the polished deck of the yacht. For a moment, I wondered how easily appearances could deceive the world. He believed he was clever, but the scent of betrayal clung to him more strongly than any fragrance. His voice carried a sharp edge, no longer coated with false charm, and the greed in his tone was impossible to hide. He did not ask me for permission, he demanded it, wielding the family name like a weapon, as if my refusal would be a stain on our bloodline. In his eyes, I was no longer a mother-in-law. I was a barrier standing between him and whatever grand scheme he thought he could pull off. He leaned forward, his breath heavy with that cloying scent of perfume, and let slip the words that made my skin crawl. "The businessmen are confirmed, the influencers are expecting the night of their lives. Even a few officials will be joining us, Mother. If you deny me this yacht, it is not only me you humiliate, but every connection that carries your last name." The arrogance in his voice rang through the room, louder than the tick of the clock on the wall. I forced my expression to remain still, though inside my thoughts spun in tight circles. Why would he need government men and flashy social figures for a supposed business celebration? The yacht was more than a vessel. It was privacy at sea, shielded from prying eyes. And suddenly I understood why he wanted it so badly. He was plotting something larger, something dangerous, and he assumed my silence meant consent. My fingers tapped softly against the arm of the chair, a habit my husband once told me revealed when I was calculating. He caught the gesture, misread it as hesitation, and pressed harder, his voice booming. "This is not about me. It is about our family's reputation, about the name your husband left behind. Do not let pride destroy what we can gain tonight." The words echoed like a threat disguised as duty. I looked at him and saw not a son-in-law, but an opportunist, desperate to gamble with everything sacred. A shadow of dread crept over me, not for the loss of a party, but for what schemes could unfold if I yielded. I let the corner of my mouth curl into the faintest smile, the kind that never reaches the eyes, and slowly placed my glass of wine onto the polished table. The sound of crystal against wood was soft, yet it cut through his speech sharper than any protest could. I did not argue, I did not rise, and my stillness unsettled him more than a storm of words ever would. To anyone watching, it may have looked as though I surrendered, but inside I knew the silence was a rope he was already tightening around his own neck. He mistook composure for weakness, not realizing that patience can be the most dangerous weapon of all. He straightened his jacket with a triumphant smirk, believing he had broken me, then turned on his heel and strode out of the cabin with the air of a man who thought victory was his. I kept my eyes on his back until the door closed, and only then did I exhale the breath I had been holding. The quiet returned, filled only by the hum of the yacht's engines and the faint clinking of the ice in my glass. I shifted my gaze toward the wide glass window, letting the moonlight guide my thoughts. Below, the dark water rippled with silver glimmers, each wave catching the light like shards of glass. I leaned closer, studying the surface as if the sea itself whispered secrets. My mind wandered to an old truth my husband once told me, that the ocean never forgets, that every drop of blood carries a call no predator can resist. In these waters, sharks roam freely, never missing the scent of weakness. I thought of him, my son-in-law, so eager to invite predators of his own making, the financiers, the false friends, the hidden officials who circled him like hungry fish. I whispered in my thoughts, almost amused, that sharks are always near, both in the depths of the sea and in the world above. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the engines fade into the distance, and memory pulled me back to the days when my husband was still alive. I saw him standing tall on the deck of the yacht, the sunlight gleaming off the polished rails, his hand resting proudly on the wood he had chosen himself. He used to tell me this $200 million vessel was not merely a boat, it was a symbol of our family's honor, a floating testament to the decades of sacrifice and persistence that had carried us from nothing to a name that commanded respect. Every time he looked at it, his eyes held the quiet fire of a man who had carved his own legacy. When he passed, grief wrapped around me like chains, but his foresight remained. The yacht was placed within a revocable trust, carefully structured with clauses as precise as his nature had always been. The document stated clearly that this asset was to be preserved for the benefit of the family, that it was never to be exploited for illegal commerce, never to be paraded as a bargaining chip in the hands of the greedy. I remembered sitting beside the attorney as the pages were read, the ink as fresh as the wound in my heart, and feeling his presence as though he were still guiding me. To me, the yacht was never just steel and luxury. It was a living memory, carrying the echo of his laughter across the water, the warmth of his arm around my shoulders during twilight voyages, the silence we shared while watching the horizon melt into night. It embodied his pride, his vision, his love, and every time I stepped aboard, I felt both his absence and his protection. That is why the demands of my son-in-law struck me as both foolish and sacrilegious. He saw only a stage for his schemes, but I saw the soul of my husband's devotion, and I knew, with an ache that steadied into resolve, that I would not let that soul be desecrated. My daughter lay upstairs, her body still tender from childbirth, her spirit fragile as if every breath required more strength than she possessed. She barely had the energy to nurse her newborn, let alone involve herself in matters of property or inheritance. In her eyes, I was still the guardian of the family, the shield that kept the storms away. Yet I could see how vulnerable she was, how easily fear or exhaustion could break her. That weakness was exactly what her husband preyed upon. To her, he was attentive, gentle, always bringing her tea, tucking a blanket around her shoulders, speaking softly as though his only wish was to ease her pain. She looked at him with gratitude, never seeing the cold calculation that tightened his jaw the moment he turned away. When his hand left hers, it became a fist, and when his eyes no longer met hers, they searched the horizon with hunger. He wanted more than comfort, more than love. He wanted control, and he believed I was the easiest obstacle, the old woman he could bend or intimidate until I yielded. I overheard him one evening, his voice low and brimming with triumph as he spoke to his friends on the phone. "Now is the time," he whispered. "This family's fortune will become my launching pad." The arrogance in his words burned hotter than fire in my chest. He spoke as if the decades of labor, the sacrifices, the trust, all of it had been crafted only to fuel his ambitions. I imagined his smirk as he paced the room, already envisioning himself standing at the helm, not just of the yacht, but of everything my husband had cherished. I stood at the doorway unseen, watching his shadow stretch across the wall, and in that moment I felt the weight of both grief and fury. My daughter could not see it. She saw only tenderness. But I saw the truth, and I knew he was not just circling the family. He was already sinking his teeth into its very heart. He painted himself as a visionary, a man ahead of his time, draped in the sleek armor of technology. Articles praised his startup as a daring fusion of artificial intelligence and blockchain, the kind of buzzwords that dazzled those eager to believe. He posed for photographs in tailored suits, his smile practiced, his voice rehearsed, while headlines called him a disruptor, a pioneer, the face of a new generation of wealth. My daughter, tired and trusting, clung to those images, believing she had married a man of brilliance. The truth, which he buried beneath glossy pages and glowing interviews, was far more hollow. Behind the curtain there was no empire, only scaffolding propped up with debt. The company's accounts bled red ink, its promises inflated with borrowed numbers, its future held together by smoke and charm. He owed vendors, he owed silent partners, he owed even his own employees, yet he strutted as if fortune were already in his pocket. I had seen men like him before, years ago, during times when speculative bubbles left ruins in their wake. They shone brightly, then collapsed, leaving others to sift through ashes. For him, appearances were oxygen. He needed the world to believe he belonged among the upper echelon, that he was one of the chosen few with access to power. The yacht, gleaming and majestic, was his perfect stage. $200 million of steel and luxury, a floating palace that could impress the skeptical, seduce the greedy, and blind those too hungry for profit to see the truth. To him it was not a memory of love, not a legacy, not a trust bound by honor, but a prop, a mask, a lure for investors he hoped to ensnare. I sat in my study with my laptop open, the light from the screen shining on my glass of wine. I looked at the file my son-in-law had sent to the yacht manager. At first it looked like a normal staffing list, but none of the names belonged to the crew I had known for years. There were no loyal sailors or trusted stewards, only strangers I had never heard of. My heart started to beat faster as I typed the first name into a search engine. What came up shocked me. There were glossy photos, polished smiles, and carefully chosen words. The profile read Escort, available for luxury companionship, travel worldwide, privacy guaranteed. I tried another name, then another, and soon the pattern became obvious. These were young men and women with perfect looks, not people hired to serve food or manage a ship. They were there to entertain, to seduce, and to turn the party into something else entirely. I leaned back in my chair, angry but quiet. This was not going to be an elegant business event meant to impress investors. It was going to be a hidden party of excess, a reckless game dressed up to look respectable. He wanted to use the yacht, the symbol of my husband's pride, as a stage for his show of corruption. And he thought I would be blind to it. The faces from those profiles stayed in my mind, faces meant to lure and distract, faces that told me this was no longer about business at all. My hand touched the folder of trust documents sitting on the desk. I felt the weight of duty pressing down on me again. I could almost hear my late husband's voice reminding me that symbols matter, that once honor is stained, it spreads everywhere. Slowly I closed the laptop, my lips pressed into a thin line. He thought he could control me, but all he had done was reveal how far he was willing to fall. I entered the yacht control room after midnight, the air heavy with silence, and turned on the internal camera system that had always been meant to protect our asset. The feeds filled the screen one by one, and I watched carefully, my hand steady on the mouse, though my pulse quickened with every frame. At first I saw ordinary tasks, crew arranging glasses, folding napkins, and polishing brass rails. Then another feed came into focus, and my breath caught in my throat. Men were hauling crates of rare wine, bottles with labels I knew were beyond the declared limits of our insurance policy. These were not the standard stock allowed for guests, but limited vintages worth fortunes, the kind of contraband used for bribes or laundering. The trust had clear alcohol liability clauses, strict rules on quantity and value, and all had to be approved in advance. What I saw on the screen broke those rules completely. A steward glanced around nervously, signed a manifest, and slipped his phone into his pocket. Later, a woman in designer clothes helped load another case into a waiting van, her eyes shifting as if she knew secrecy was required. My chest tightened with cold fury. I clicked to another feed, and this time I saw him. My son-in-law stood at the dock, his face lit by the glow of his phone, and his voice carried through the system, sharp and filthy. "Tonight we must have enough wine, enough services," he said. "If needed, I will test the goods first. I want them to forget their conscience." The words struck like knives, proof in his own voice, undeniable and damning. I leaned closer, heart pounding, and began saving the clips one by one. I noted the times, cataloged the labels, and matched them with the clauses in the trust. The evidence was clear, the betrayal no longer a suspicion but a fact. Slowly, I closed the system, the reflection of the screen fading from my eyes. My husband's legacy had been threatened, but the cameras had given me the truth, and the truth would be my weapon. His words left no doubt in my mind. He was not only a man desperate to boast, he was deliberately arranging an organized den of excess on the very legacy my husband had built. The polished image of a successful entrepreneur that appeared in magazines and glowing articles was nothing more than an empty mask. Behind it stood a man of decay, hungry to consume whatever he could not create. I did not raise my voice, nor did I rush to confront him, because anger would only grant him a sense of power. Instead, I pressed the laptop shut, the quiet click carrying more weight than any argument I might deliver. I reached for the bottle and poured myself another glass of wine, watching the dark red swirl in the crystal as if I were marking time itself. Every gesture was controlled, deliberate, a reminder that patience is sharper than fury. I let the silence fill the room, a silence that steadied me while leaving space for him to reveal more of himself. He believed he had freedom, that I was subdued by his arrogance, but I understood that the more he displayed his schemes, the stronger my proof would become. Let him summon his guests, let him fill the yacht with his noise and his shadows, because each careless step only drew him closer to the edge he could not see. The next evening the yacht shone like a floating palace, every light blazing against the dark water, a spectacle designed to dazzle rather than to honor. A long carpet rolled out from the dock to the deck, red as blood under the floodlights, and attendants held trays high as champagne flutes clinked without pause. The air smelled of salt and expensive perfume, and music drifted from hidden speakers, swelling to welcome each arrival. One by one they came, the technology entrepreneurs, the financial investors, the social media stars with their hungry smiles. Their gowns glittered beneath the spotlights, sequins catching like fire, and their suits were tailored to perfection. Hands waved to cameras, voices carried rehearsed greetings, and every gesture spoke of calculation rather than warmth. I stood in the shadows, watching faces tilt toward one another in feigned intimacy, every laugh a little too polished, every embrace rehearsed for effect. Each guest believed they were entering an exclusive networking gala, a gathering of visionaries and power brokers who might shape the future. Yet I could see the hollowness behind the shine. Their eyes darted not with curiosity but with appetite, their smiles bent not with joy but with ambition. The yacht, once a vessel of family memory, had been transformed into a stage, and they were eager actors ready to play their part in a script of indulgence. I let the scene unfold without interference, noting how easily pretense could dress itself in luxury. The chandeliers above reflected in the glasses they raised, but beneath the glitter lay nothing but shadows. The grandeur of the moment was a curtain, its folds heavy with deceit, and I knew that soon enough it would be torn aside. The music shifted without warning, the deep thrum of a DJ's bass rolling across the deck until every glass seemed to vibrate. Neon lights burst alive, purple and red beams cutting through the polished chandeliers, washing the yacht in colors that felt closer to a nightclub than a reception. The mood changed instantly, laughter louder, bodies closer, and the thin veil of sophistication began to slip. Then they appeared, the so-called staff I had seen on those profiles. Escorts blended seamlessly among the guests, their smiles bright and calculated, their movements practiced. They carried bottles of champagne, pouring with practiced ease, but soon their hands lingered on shoulders, arms draped casually across powerful men, whispers pressed too close to eager ears. Women in glittering gowns leaned into young strangers with chiseled jaws, and men in expensive suits wrapped themselves around flawless bodies that had been chosen for effect. What had been billed as an elite gathering became something else entirely, a carefully staged descent. I stood in the corner of the deck, my glass steady in my hand, watching the transformation with cold clarity. Business cards were exchanged, yes, but so were embraces, promises traded in the shadows of flashing lights. Contracts were spoken of, but every laugh and every touch made it clear that the real deals were sealed in temptation, not in trust. At the center of it all stood my son-in-law, face glowing with sweat and triumph, raising his glass high above the crowd. His words rang out, slurred with bravado. Tonight, we do not only sign contracts, we sign with the heat of our own blood. The guests roared with approval, but to my ears it sounded more like a confession than a toast. His language, deliberately vague, struck me as both reckless and chilling, as if he knew the room had already surrendered its conscience. The music was still pounding when a sudden cry cut through the air, sharp enough to slice the rhythm in half. I turned toward the sound and saw her, my daughter's closest friend, a young woman who had come only to show support, collapse onto the carpet. Her glass slipped from her hand, champagne spilling like liquid gold across the floor, and her body crumpled as though the strength had been drained in an instant. The lights flashed red and purple over her pale face, and the shock froze the crowd before panic cracked open. Guests rushed forward, some calling her name, others fumbling for their phones, but not everyone was alarmed. A few men in tailored suits exchanged quick glances and forced their smiles to remain, pretending the collapse was nothing unusual. Their calmness was unnatural, almost rehearsed, and I felt the chill of realization spread through me. This was not an accident. The drink had been tampered with, and their composure revealed this was not the first time such a scene had played out before their eyes. Voices rose, high-pitched and desperate, while the music stumbled to a halt. Some women covered their mouths in horror, others demanded help, yet still the men closest to the bar stayed suspiciously still, their hands folded around glasses as though nothing had happened. I stood near the railing, my own breath caught in my chest, fury burning cold behind my calm expression. The illusion of glamour had shattered. The expensive gowns, the glittering lights, the polite laughter, all of it dissolved in the face of one woman lying unconscious on the floor. What was meant to be a night of so-called networking had revealed itself as something darker, a trap designed to exploit, to humiliate, to control. My heart ached for the girl, for my daughter upstairs, unaware of the danger surrounding her. But beneath the grief, another force grew stronger. I knew the mask had fallen. No one could deny now that this was corruption at its core. The phones kept flashing, each guest eager to capture proof of their supposed elite lives, when one influencer raised his device to livestream. He smiled to his audience, talking about champagne and luxury, but his camera slid across a darker corner of the deck. There, the scene unfolded in plain sight. A young CEO, recently exposed in the press for fraud and money laundering, leaned close to my son-in-law. With a forced grin, he pressed a velvet box into my son-in-law's hands, the logo unmistakable, a brand known for its newest diamond line. My son-in-law accepted it eagerly, his eyes gleaming as though the stones inside were a crown he believed he deserved. The livestream caught every detail. Viewers saw the CEO, already disgraced, hand over the box. They saw my son-in-law take it without hesitation, no contracts, no explanations, only a silent transaction that reeked of corruption. Within minutes, the clip exploded across social media. Comments flooded the screen, voices outraged, mocking, demanding. People wrote his name again and again, the man they once called a successful entrepreneur, now exposed as part of a dirty exchange with a known criminal. The influencer froze, realizing what had been captured. His smile faltered, his words stumbled, and he rushed to delete the video. But it was too late. Thousands had already downloaded and shared it, reposting across every platform hungry for scandal. The truth was out, impossible to bury. On the deck, tension spread like smoke. Guests whispered, their faces tight with unease. Some tried to carry on, dancing and laughing too loudly, but the cracks were clear. Even those who had not seen the clip felt the shift, the weight of exposure pressing down on the night. Outside the yacht, the world was already watching, and the glittering mask of respectability was tearing apart piece by piece, leaving only the foul truth behind. Long before the first guest stepped onto the yacht, I had already moved in silence, laying the groundwork for what I knew might come. While he busied himself with invitations and headlines, I was in the shadows, arranging the details that would protect my husband's legacy. I met discreetly with a trusted investigator, a man who owed no loyalty to anyone but the truth, and together we walked through every corner of the vessel. Tiny cameras, forensic grade and nearly invisible, were set into corners of the lounge and beneath the chandeliers, their lenses disguised among the glimmer of glass. Each one streamed to a private channel locked under my name, untouchable by his hands. I went further still. The wine glasses, polished to perfection, each carried a chip so small it looked like nothing more than a sparkle in the crystal. These markers were calibrated to detect tampering, whether a substance was added or a switch was attempted. Even the poker table, often his chosen stage for bravado, hid a sensor strip along the felt. Cards could be traced, movements recorded, and every wager mapped for patterns that would expose cheating or coercion. I remember pausing as the crew went about their normal duties, none aware of the layers being woven beneath their eyes. To them it was another gala, another evening of excess, but for me it was a battlefield waiting to be claimed. I poured myself a glass of water, steadying my hands, and reminded myself of what was at stake. My husband had once said that wealth without integrity was nothing but a curse. Tonight, I would honor that truth. When I finally closed the laptop after the systems came online, I felt not fear, but clarity. I had turned his playground into a trap of his own making. Whatever mask he chose to wear, however many lights and cameras he invited, I would have the real footage, the real evidence. And when the moment arrived, his downfall would be recorded not by rumor, but by the tools he never thought to search for. The lower deck of the yacht had been transformed into something unrecognizable, its polished wood and velvet curtains hiding the truth of what was unfolding. What once held storage and quiet lounges now roared with noise and greed. Tables glowed beneath neon strips, roulette wheels spun with metallic clicks, and cards slapped against green felt as fortunes shifted in seconds. The guests who had entered with tailored grace now stripped away their elegance, leaning forward with flushed faces, their laughter raw, their eyes gleaming with fever. A young CEO tossed diamond earrings into the pot as casually as coins, while a popular influencer waved stacks of cash, his voice hoarse from shouting bets. The air grew thick with smoke, perfume, and desperation. Hidden forensic cameras caught it all. Every gemstone glitter, every bill exchanged, every reckless wager was preserved in silent clarity. What they believed was a private indulgence was already becoming a chain around their necks. I sat upstairs, glass in hand, watching the feeds on a small device no one suspected I carried, my calm expression hiding the fire inside me. The plan was more intricate than they could imagine. My attorney had prepared an escrow trap, locking the $10 million event budget inside an account under my ownership. The funds could only be released for legitimate expenses, each payment signed by my son-in-law in his role as event director. And now, with every forged invoice and inflated order, he was leaving his own signature as evidence of fraud. The trap was tightening with each glass poured, each light switched on, each gambler seated. I had gone further still. A select group of trusted journalists waited nearby, sworn to silence until the signal came. Their cameras were ready, their pens prepared, and all they needed was proof of violation. One word from me and the party would collapse into scandal under the weight of its own exposure. I lifted the glass to my lips, watching diamonds scatter like chips across the table, and thought of my husband's voice reminding me that patience is the sharpest blade. I sat in the private cabin, the glow of multiple screens flickering across my face, and performed the final check with the steadiness of a surgeon before an operation. The forensic cameras were active, their red indicators discreetly blinking, and the storage hub showed more than enough capacity to capture every second. My pocket held a mini recorder, its battery tested and full, and beside it lay a backup device, also charged. On the table, a compact drone rested within its case, its rotors silent, waiting for the moment it would rise to film the deck and the waters that surrounded us. With a single keystroke, I opened the master screen, a grid of images filling the monitor, each angle a piece of the puzzle. The lower deck with its roulette wheels and frantic gamblers, the lounge where glasses overflowed with rare wine, the private corners where whispers carried more weight than signatures. And soon, from above, the drone would capture the entire vessel in context, the glittering lights floating on black waves like a jewel masking poison. I leaned back, my breathing steady, refusing to let emotion dictate my timing. There was no need to interfere, no need to disrupt the theater they had built. The stronger choice was patience, letting them reveal themselves under the comfort of their own arrogance. Every laugh, every exchange, every reckless display was another stone in the wall closing around them. My fingers traced the stem of the glass beside me, the quiet swirl of wine a reminder of my resolve. I thought of my husband's voice telling me that truth requires witnesses, and tonight I had more than witnesses. I had evidence woven into every corner of the ship. Soon the spectacle above would not be remembered for its champagne or its gowns, but for the moment masks fell. For now, I simply watched, calm, waiting, as the cameras told the story for me. The moment had come, and I pressed the remote hidden in my hand. Music cut off mid-beat, the bass collapsing into silence so sharp that every head turned. The LED wall on the main deck flickered, no longer glowing with curated slideshows of yachts and luxury brands. Instead, the first hidden clip burst onto the screen. The lower deck appeared in perfect clarity, roulette wheels spinning, poker chips stacked high, cash and diamonds passed across the table with frantic hands. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the camera panned, exposing faces they all recognized, men who preached virtue, women who flaunted success, now stripped bare in greed. The feed shifted, sharp and merciless. Another angle showed the upper lounge, escorts draped across powerful shoulders, lips brushing ears, glasses filled with wine that shimmered too brightly. A laugh rang out from the recording, shrill and vulgar, followed by the unmistakable image of a bottle being tampered with, liquid spiking crystal-clear champagne. The silence on deck grew heavier, the only sound the shuffle of uneasy feet. Then came the final strike. The screen froze for a heartbeat, then replayed the very live stream clip that had already spread online. In the corner of the yacht, my son-in-law stood grinning as the disgraced young CEO slipped a diamond box into his hand. The faces were clear, undeniable, proof framed not by rumor but by their own arrogance. The reaction was instant. Some guests recoiled as if the images had burned their skin. A few influencers yanked masks over their mouths, hoping to hide, while others lowered their eyes, their posture collapsing. Whispers rose like a storm, hissing, overlapping, swelling until the air itself seemed to tremble. I stood at the edge, still as stone, watching the tide turn. The mask of luxury had been torn apart in one motion, and what remained was raw, filthy truth. The silence shattered when the first camera flashed, followed by another, then a storm of light that turned the deck into a stage no one had agreed to stand on. According to the plan whispered days earlier, the journalists I had summoned now revealed themselves. Lenses zoomed in, microphones stretched forward, voices colliding with rapid-fire questions. Is this an underground casino? Why are diamonds being exchanged? Who approved the spiked wine? Each word carried weight. Each angle captured the faces that only moments before had been lost in laughter and indulgence. At the edge of the dock, security shifted into place. Discreet officers, arranged in cooperation with the harbor patrol, closed secondary exits with quiet precision. Doors once open to the night air now locked. pathways narrowed until the guests realized they were no longer free to drift away. A group of businessmen attempted to leave, suits disheveled, but were gently blocked and asked to remain for verification. Their protests rang thin against the evidence that had already filled the screens. The lights, once warm and golden, cooled into a sharp white, draining glamour from sequins and skin alike. The chandeliers above seemed less like jewels and more like interrogation lamps, and the grand salon felt transformed. What had been paraded as a gala was now nothing but a tribunal, the tables no longer offering champagne but consequences. I stood in the shadow near the railing, calm in the storm, watching the transformation unfold exactly as I had imagined. Every camera click sealed their disgrace, every question pinned them tighter to the truth. No one could hide behind charm or excuses now. The party was no longer theirs to control. It had become a stage for revelation, and there was no curtain left to drop. The crowd had barely recovered from the storm of flashing cameras when another figure stepped forward. My attorney, calm and deliberate, carried his laptop under one arm and set it down on the nearest table. With a few keystrokes, the LED wall lit again, but this time not with hidden footage. A spreadsheet appeared, columns of neat text glowing cold under the lights. Vendor names lined the left margin, categories like hospitality, VIP gifts, and premium liquor stretched across the screen, and on the far right, the electronic signature of my son-in-law. Each line carried a timestamp precise to the minute, leaving no doubt of who had approved every expense. The lawyer's voice cut through the murmurs, steady and formal. According to the appendix governing yacht use and the escrow terms for this event, employing the vessel for gambling or disguised prostitution constitutes a violation. Effective immediately, your right to use the yacht is revoked. These records will be forwarded to the authorities for investigation. His words fell like stones, measured and irreversible. My son-in-law stumbled forward, his face pale under the cold white lights. His hands shook as he raised them, his voice a weak protest. "This is only PR, only networking," he stammered. But even as the words left his mouth, the screen betrayed him. The video resumed, showing chips exchanged for stacks of bills, diamonds pushed across green felt, gifts passed in shadows. His denial shattered against the evidence displayed before every eye. Gasps broke into whispers, whispers into sharp accusations. A few guests pulled away from him as though his disgrace were contagious. He tried to speak again, but the footage continued to roll, each frame another nail in the coffin of his excuses. I stood silently, my breath steady, watching him crumble not from my hand, but from the weight of his own signature. Paperwork, precise and undeniable, had struck harder than any blow. The noise of whispers and cameras cut away when she appeared. My daughter stepped onto the deck, pale from exhaustion yet fierce in her resolve, cradling the newborn in her arms. The child stirred softly against her chest, wrapped in a blanket white as foam. For a heartbeat the entire room fell still, as if even the sea outside had stopped to listen. She looked straight at her husband, her voice trembling not from weakness but from fury. "You dared to host this filth, to indulge in this spectacle, while our child is barely 1 month in this world." Her words rang through the silence like a bell, sharp and undeniable. The pause that followed stretched long, heavy, unbearable. Men shifted uncomfortably in their suits, their collars too tight under the weight of shame. A few women turned their faces away, tears sliding down their cheeks, not only in anger but in humiliation that such betrayal had been carried out before them. Even those who had come to defend him lowered their eyes, unable to look at the infant swaddled in innocence while corruption spread across the room. I stood behind her, steady as stone, my hand resting lightly on her shoulder. The cameras swung toward us, hungry for the image, but I felt no fear of exposure. I spoke slowly, each word deliberate, each sound filling the cold air. "Honor can be bought with money, but kindness never can." The sentence echoed in the vast chamber, reverberating off steel and glass, sealing the moment as something more than scandal. No contract, no lawyer's file, no video could match the sight of a young mother with her child, facing the man who had chosen greed over family. That vision, framed by truth and magnified by silence, became the final blow. He staggered back as if struck, his face drained of color, his excuses gone. What remained was the collapse, captured in every lens, preserved in every mind. Sweat streamed down his face, soaking through the collar of his shirt as he clawed at his tie and ripped it free. His eyes darted like a cornered animal, panic shoving aside whatever pride he had left. With a sudden burst, he shoved past the people around him, knocking one glass to the floor, and charged toward the stern rail. Security shouted after him, their voices sharp with warning. "Stop! It's dangerous!" But he didn't hear, or perhaps he refused to listen. His body vaulted over the railing, and a second later the sound split the night. A heavy splash, a single brutal sound that silenced every whisper. For one heartbeat, nothing moved. Then a scream ripped across the deck. "Sharks! Sharks!" The cry echoed into the black water. This was the Florida Keys, close to Miami, where everyone knew the stories. Bull sharks and tiger sharks prowled these currents, drawn to anything that thrashed against the waves. Lights swung down, cutting through the darkness, beams chasing the frantic movements below. His arms flailed, his palms slapped at the water as though he could push it away. Each strike sent more splashes flying, sounds that would only draw predators closer. Panic spread across the crowd, guests clutching one another, some covering their mouths, others frozen in place. The sea churned with his struggle, droplets glittering under the searchlights, and his cries broke into ragged gasps. "Get me out! Help!" The words were swallowed by the night, thin against the endless tide. From the rail I stood still, my heart steady, my hand firm on the glass I held. There was no need for me to move, no need for me to shout. The ocean had already answered. The frenzy below became a spectacle of fear, a mirror of everything he had built. Greed thrashing into desperation, arrogance stripped into naked terror. The night held its breath, and the water waited, dark and merciless. The drone hovered above the stern, its blades humming softly as the lens captured everything below. From that height the water glistened black, broken only by the pale sweep of fins sliding beneath the surface, shadows circling just out of reach. Searchlights cut through the darkness, beams darting like spears, and a lifebuoy splashed into the waves with a hollow thud. Shouts echoed across the deck, ropes flung down, arms straining as the rescue team fought to pull him back from the abyss. When they finally dragged him onto the deck, the sight was pitiful. Salt water streamed from his hair, plastering it flat against his forehead. His designer suit clung to him in heavy folds, ruined, the fabric dripping with brine and shame. As he collapsed forward, his luxury watch slid loose from his wrist, striking the planks with a metallic clang that rang sharper than any accusation. Around him, puddles spread, mixing seawater with the faint trace of blood from scraped skin. He coughed violently, his chest heaving, spitting out mouthfuls of ocean. His eyes darted in panic, wide and uncomprehending, searching for escape where none existed. Hands trembled as he tried to shield his face, but the lenses found him anyway. Cameras zoomed in, flashes bursting like gunfire. A moment ago he had stood as a self-proclaimed successful CEO, groomed in silk and pride. Now he was reduced to a broken figure, soaked and desperate, begging for the chance to hide. Each click of the shutter sealed the humiliation deeper. The drone's gaze circled, capturing not only his collapse but also the faces of those who turned away in disgust. The image would spread, indelible, a portrait of arrogance drowned by its own weight. I remained still by the railing, watching as truth did its work. No revenge could have been crueler than letting him face the world exactly as he was in that moment. The drone footage did not stay locked away. Within hours, it was trimmed and cut into a single merciless clip. The image of him thrashing in the black water, the glint of dorsal fins circling, and his desperate climb back onto the deck became the center of every feed. Beneath it, a caption burned across the screen. By midnight, the only friends who came to play with him were sharks. The meaning was clear on two levels, literal and cruel. Sharks had surfaced in the water, their shadows cutting circles below his body. Yet the greater truth was sharper still. the investors, influencers, and so-called allies who had once surrounded him vanished like smoke, leaving him prey not only to the sea, but to the predators of his own world. By morning, news traveled faster than the tide. Contracts were canceled without negotiation, partnerships dissolved before signatures dried. His social accounts, once flooded with likes and compliments, turned into battlegrounds of ridicule until comments were shut off entirely. Silence replaced applause, the kind of silence that swallows reputations whole. He tried to reach for allies, but every call fell flat, every door closed as if he had never mattered. I remained on the deck, the salt wind tugging at my hair, the sea rolling endless beyond the lights. Around me, the wreckage of the night still lingered, overturned glasses, stained carpets, and the echo of shame. I looked at him once more, hunched and dripping, his hands shaking as he hid from the cameras still flashing. My voice was soft, yet it carried through the quiet like a final verdict. You thought the sea would shelter your ambition. The sea only returns the sound of fins. The sea had settled into calm again, its surface smooth under the pale wash of moonlight. From the deck I rested my hand on the wooden rail, feeling the grain beneath my fingertips, the air cool and salted. The city lights glimmered far in the distance, shrinking to faint sparks on the horizon, and the noise that had consumed the night, sirens, shouting, cameras snapping, was gone. Only the steady hum of the vessel remained, broken now and then by the muffled footsteps of sailors clearing empty glasses, folding linens, sweeping shards of crystal into quiet piles. They worked in silence, leaving the upper deck hollow, a wide stage stripped bare. Inside the cabin, my daughter rocked gently with the baby pressed against her chest. The child had surrendered to sleep, breathing soft and even, unaware of the storms that had raged. She signed the police statement with a steady hand, the pen scratching across the paper as the lawyer explained each clause. At her request, he would file for temporary protection and begin separating finances, placing a shield between her and the wreckage of her husband's fall. Tonight was not about divorce, not yet, but the decision had already been made in her body. She left his house behind and returned to mine. The private physician had scheduled her postpartum checkup, and she nodded, agreeing also to counseling. Her eyes still carried the red trace of tears, but the wild panic that had clouded her face earlier was gone. In its place was something fragile, a thin thread of trust in herself, in me, in the life she now carried. She exhaled slowly, and for the first time I felt her weight ease against the chair, no longer braced for collapse. I remained outside, staring at the quiet sea. The moon spilled silver across the waves as if to erase the memory of chaos. Yet I knew storms leave their mark even when the water pretends to be still. My fingers tightened on the rail. For tonight, peace returned, though I sensed it was only the beginning of a longer voyage. My voice rose low, steady, carrying into the night like a vow. I did not need to lift a hand, for the ocean itself had answered. Sharks always find the scent of blood, and his greed was the beacon that summoned them. Yet even as justice seemed delivered, the question clung to me like salt on the wind. To keep the inheritance is one thing, but does that mean I have truly kept the family? The words lingered as I stood alone, their weight heavier than the silver moon above the waves. The sea stirred gently, small ripples catching the light, no longer the chaos of moments before. I turned from the railing, each step deliberate as I walked back into the cabin. My hand touched the switch, and the great lamps went dark, leaving only a single glow burning softly beside the cradle. In that circle of light, innocence slept undisturbed, a reminder of why this battle had been fought. It was not an ending, but the first step into a new order, one where dignity would be guarded and greed no longer given a home. I paused at the doorway, listening to the quiet breathing inside, and felt the air shift within me. Tonight had drawn a line that could not be erased, a boundary set between what could be saved and what had to be cast out. The world outside might call it scandal, might feed on humiliation, but here the truth was simpler. A family could be broken by betrayal, yet rebuilt by resolve. The cameras would spin their stories, the financiers would whisper of downfall, but none of it mattered as much as the lesson etched into the night. Wealth without virtue rots, legacy without kindness collapses, and age does not weaken a woman, it sharpens her into stone. If this story touches you, share it, so that every daughter, every mother, every woman standing alone knows her worth cannot be stolen, not by greed, not by fear, not by time.